outside my window right now, I can see a tree on my neighbor's house that it leans right along the roof line. Just leans right over and just follows the roof line, not quite touching it really, but definitely leaning. And it's really reminding me of how I was able to get from being a very poor single mom to owning land in an incredibly beautiful valley in Talent. The idea that people can just pull themselves up by their bootstraps is just BS in America. And it's important to me that nobody who sees my story and what I've been able to accomplish thinks that I was able to get here through, for instance, government services or, social services, etc. It's been private help that has gotten me here. And the only part that even could qualify as pulling myself up by my bootstraps is that I was fortunate to learn when I was in college how to apply for scholarships, and learning the process of explaining yourself, where you've been, what your challenges are, what you believe that you're capable of, what you're going to do with the money or the support that you're going to receive, was a process that was pretty indispensable with being able to ask private parties for support. And another thing that I learned in college that definitely changed my life was just some of the realities about women and economics. And I learned that, just statistically speaking, no opinions about it or, causality created, but just statistically speaking, the way that women gain wealth, the most prominent way, the most sure way that women gain significant wealth is through marriage. It's not through jobs, it's not through college education, it's through marriage. And I remember when I read that, being, at the time a single widowed mother of 3 children, feeling like, well, shit, because I don't really want to get married again. I want to be in love again, but I don't want to get married again. And I don't ever want to experience that feeling of thinking I could rely on someone and then realizing that, people die. Like, people can die. So there's a level of autonomy that I really required in order to move forward. And so in that moment of learning that, I realized that it made more sense to actually become genuinely good friends with people who had means. Not as a way at all of hoping to take advantage of someone or whatever, but more as a way of understanding that everybody wants to give, everybody wants to do some good in the world and have a sense of meaning. The other important thing that I learned in college, studying sociology and statistics, is that statistically lower income people give a significant amount more money to charitable causes and to each other than people of incredible means do. It's a lot more. And I saw that when I was doing community organizing work and would ask for donations going door to door, that, the wealthier neighborhoods, they weren't giving like the lower income neighborhoods were. Definitely not according to, percentage of income. And at the time I had this kind of, this attitude. I was, identified as an anarchist. I was, very much into, class war and in my own victim story, which I'm actually not going to say is not true because it was very much a victim story. But I was in it and didn't really see a way out, and so I was angry about the economic system. And that didn't lend itself to me wanting to make friends with people who had more means. And what I learned as I experimented with making friends with people who had more means than me was that, number one, there's huge class differences. There's almost like a language barrier. And so I kind of felt like a fish out of water. Number two, while extreme wealth is often created because of greed and bad moral values and et cetera, there's a lot of people of greater means who are extremely caring, extremely loving, have incredible moral values. To be rich in itself is not bad. So yeah, there's a big difference between people, for instance, who inherit their wealth versus earn their wealth. There's just as much diversity and variation among wealthy people as there is among not wealthy people. Anyway, I'm not here to tell you to feel better about extreme wealth, because there should not be billionaires when there are people who don't even have adequate housing. But that is kind of what I'm getting at, is that it wasn't through hard work, getting a college education, etc. alone that I was able to get from, living in extremely impoverished housing, inadequate housing situations, to finally buying a home. It was through the kindness of others and strategically and lovingly asking for help, being very specific about what I need, proving that I'm worth investing in, and having genuine relationships of mutual care with people who could help me out. So that started out with things like small loans, like if my car needed repair, asking somebody who could afford to help for $500 and saying, here's my situation, let me explain, let me tell you about my dreams, let me tell you where I'm headed. Hey, I got this scholarship, look what I did with this scholarship, kind of giving proof. And then asking for that small loan, utilizing it to get myself ahead, paying it back on time, usually ahead of time, and then circling back around, like when I return the money, and telling the whole story of this is how it benefited me, this is how it benefited my kids. Thank you so much. And even relating it to the bigger political sphere of like, hey, it's not often that someone in my position can, get the resources and help that they need. And this means so much to me personally. It means so much to, my dreams and goals. But it also means a lot politically. It's a radical act to loan money to someone who's in poverty and really has a big dream, doesn't have the means to get there. So thank you, that kind of gratitude. And so then a $500 loan could lead into, asking for a bigger loan next time, and just kind of working my way up that way. Anyway, which leads to the story of how I got the Sunny Joy Farm property on Hummingbird Lane. After my husband passed away and I had 3 kids, I was living in a tiny little yurt along Rock Creek out in Williams, Oregon. Amazing fond memories of those days, because I definitely loved living in a little yurt close to the earth with my kiddos and was very proud to be a mountain woman. But at the same time, it was a yurt with very thin walls, only wood heat, an outhouse, or sometimes a composting toilet system, which was a bucket system, propane cook stove, and water that came off the creek, so sometimes it would freeze in the winter and we'd just be without water. So it was extremely rustic, part of which I loved, part of which was excessively hard on me. In fact, during my 3rd pregnancy, I suffered some pretty significant injuries because of how much lifting and carrying and hauling that I was doing while pregnant and with 2 little kids. Yeah, so it was very close to the earth and wonderful, but also completely inadequate and very, very hard on me. I actually don't think it was hard on the kids, but kids are super resilient, and living close to the earth doesn't feel like a hardship for them. And I made sure it didn't feel like a hardship. During the time that I was living in the first yurt, my husband developed a drug addiction that I was completely naive to, and we ended up splitting up. We didn't divorce, but we separated. Not too long, about 9 months after we separated, he overdosed And so that left me and the kids with, the kids didn't have a father. At that time, I didn't really have a career or source of income that was reliable. So we had a lot of catching up to do. And all of that catching up to do needed to be done with a very broken heart. So we moved out of the little yurt. We actually stayed in a shelter for a while. Got out of the shelter and then stayed at my friend Kathy's house. She had a wooden yurt and she was going on her honeymoon, and it was going to be a month long. So we got to stay in her home while she was on her honeymoon. And during that month that I was staying there, I was able to purchase on credit a larger yurt, like a 30-foot yurt, but it needed to be disassembled in one location and reassembled in another. So I gathered some community support around me, and I also worked with the Department of Human Services system, and I was able to get some emergency funds, emergency housing funds. And I used those funds to pay someone to build the yurt on some raw land. So there was adjacent to a community property, there were some private homeowners that were willing to allow me to build my yurt on their property. So with the help of about 3 or 4 community members, we built the platform, put the yurt up, put a wood stove in. The second yurt had a little upgrades because I was able to put in a propane heater that would at least keep the temperature up in the yurt to 65 so that it wasn't quite so cold when I came home from school or work or wherever we were gone for the day. Started out with just a garden hose for the sink, but eventually got plumbing in. We still only had an outhouse, but in addition to the outhouse, we did have a composting toilet, manufactured kind of a one that was inside the house, so that was a lot more convenient. Added a dishwasher, and we had the internet. So I really felt like I was sort of like a modern primitive, and that was a really wonderful way to live that I was very proud of for quite some time. So I lived in that yurt for, I don't know, maybe 3 years, and during that time I put myself through community college, utilizing all of the grants that I could. No scholarships yet, but just a lot of grants. And then it became apparent that there just wasn't going to be much in terms of educational opportunities for the children out in this very rural small town that was quickly becoming the primary industry, was quickly becoming the cannabis industry, where it formerly had been organic farms, just organic like vegetable and medicinal herb farms. Was kind of, a lot of cannabis growers were moving in, and it just didn't seem like the environment I really wanted to raise my kids in, and there wasn't very much opportunity for me for jobs and career advancement, as well as there being kind of limited school opportunities. So we made the decision to move into town, and that was Ashland, so that I could pursue my bachelor's degree at Southern Oregon University, and the kids could go to public schools that had a lot more resources and opportunity. That was a really difficult move for me. That was in 2005. But moving to town was good in a lot of ways, because instead of having, only an outhouse and having like a cold outdoor laundry room facility that we had built, and being 30 minutes from a grocery store, all of a sudden in town in student family housing, we had 2 flushing toilets, a laundry room that was like in the house that was warm, push button heat with thermostats, and we could, order a pizza and have it delivered within 15 minutes. So that radically changed my life, mostly in ways that allowed me to be with my kids more, which was the main goal. I think that time is where I started to kind of develop my affinity toward being sort of mythopoetic, because I didn't have the forest and deep nature like right around me that I was immersed in to help me stay grounded and connected. And so I had to learn to connect with it even though it was far away, and to sort of conjure it within my own being. So I think that was a really significant time in learning to carry with me this sense of animism and connection to the natural world. So I lived in student housing from 2005 to 2007. I was pursuing a degree in sociology. It was a Bachelor of Science in sociology. And I also stayed in school just a little longer, enough to get a nonprofit business management certificate and a minor in gender studies. Then in 2007, when I graduated, I had the opportunity, a family member, a very dear friend, he was the best friend of my brother. He was in a position where he could afford to buy a house in Ashland. He lived up in Seattle, and he offered to purchase a home that I could live in, that he would rent to me for just the cost of the mortgage, which was a really incredible deal. It was a verbal agreement, so basically he said, I'm going to buy this house for you and the kids to live in to make sure you're stable and secure and can stay in Ashland, and the kids will have stable housing through their entire schooling. And like I said, I would just pay the mortgage and be responsible for repairs and etc. But there was no way for it to be actually in writing. So it was just a verbal agreement with him, which was, involved a lot of trust on my part, which was difficult for me to extend, honestly, after having been widowed and, again, just really wanting my complete autonomy. So we did that. We moved into Harmony House in 2007, right after I graduated, and I quickly wanted to start turning Harmony House into everything that I loved about the Williams community and the organic farms and the lifestyle that I had really dreamed of. So before the kids' daddy passed away, what our dream was that we basically moved out of a regular house and moved into a little tiny yurt in order to save money. And the point of saving money was so that we could put enough money together for a down payment on some farmland, because we wanted to be organic farmers. He wanted to open a little cafe that was kind of like a bento cafe that would be all organic, maybe even drive-through, and that a lot of the food would come from the farm. So that was our big dream, was being farmers, and he actually worked for a while for one of the organic farms out in Williams. This was all before he passed away. So when he passed away, it took me a few years to realize, through the help of therapy and life coaching, that I didn't need to give up that dream. So a dream that started way back in 1999, I think, of having an organic farm and living off the land, was still alive in 2007 when I moved into Harmony House. At Harmony House, I began to build out a fantastic garden. It started out as mostly lawn. It kind of just had a little postage stamp sized plot of garden with some raised beds. There was a big apple tree that needed a lot of remediation. Together with the help of my partner at the time, Justin, we rolled back the lawn. We just cut the lawn out into sod, and we rolled it all the way back to what would become the outer edges of the fence line. Before we rolled the lawn out, we took about 2 or 3 weeks and we developed a sun map, so that we used stakes and we marked off where the edge of the shade line was, so that we knew where the maximum sun was for the garden. And that ended up being kind of a cool curvy line. So when we rolled the sod back and kind of made it these mounds along where the fence would go, that was along the shade line at the time. And then with those mounds, we covered them with 3 or 4 layers of newspaper, and then put some compost on top of that and planted strawberries in it, so that we had a little perennial food border. And then started planting in the garden all of our annual crops over time. So over 10 years time that I lived there, that perennial border had a lot of ground covers that were habitat for beneficial insects. There was blueberries, apples. I always wanted to do pears, but I never got the pears in. So there was espalier apples, blueberries, strawberries, And then along the deck we had raspberries, another big bed of strawberries, just slowly trying to turn it into a food forest. During the time that I was living and gardening there, Justin and I, when we were together, were raising 5 sons. He had 2 sons and I had 3. And he actually was friends with my husband, Chris. So it was kind of a great pairing. I think Justin felt some responsibility for my kids because they were his good friends' children. And I actually knew his former wife, so his kids already felt like family to me too. So we were raising 5 boys together, which was a lot of feeding kids from the kitchen. So we really enjoyed growing as much food as we possibly could. And as time went on and we got better and better at growing food on this, small little in-town kind of a lot, it was only a third of an acre, including the house. So the part that I was actually gardening was probably, I don't know, a sixth of an acre or something. Anyway, so that's what was happening there. I was growing primarily food, and that was amazing. At one point, we started to weigh all of the food that was coming off the property, and once we got to 100 pounds, and it was only like June 30th or something, it wasn't even July, so that didn't even include the apples. And at that point, we were like, okay, this is really awesome to know that we can grow so much food on such a small plot, and we just kind of stopped weighing it. But that's a moment I felt really proud of, to be like, I could grow 100 pounds of food on this tiny little lot. And that was really inspiring. So then as the years went on, I lived at Harmony House for 17 years. So over time, I ended up gradually shifting from primarily focusing on food to primarily focusing on attracting beneficial insects. So I was growing a lot of pollinator plants, ground covers, playing around a lot with living green mulches, just always keeping the ground covered at all times so it's not exposed to the sun or erosion from rain, and just videotaping, recording all of the little beneficial insects, which I just love so much. And I still, to this day, from that time period, have a practice where whenever I listen to love songs, I always imagine that the love songs are actually between like me and a ladybug, or me and a soldier fly, or a little beetle of some kind or something. That's always what comes to mind when I hear love songs. Anyway, so I focused on beneficial insects for a long time, and that was when I started my garden coaching services. I love teaching people how to create a similar environment to what I did at Harmony House, where you can grow a lot of your own food, a lot of your, kitchen herbs, medicine, cut flowers. I was raising chickens and also rabbits, and so we had a wonderful closed loop system going on there where I used the manure from the chickens and rabbits to fertilize the garden. We had a really active, thriving compost with lots of red wiggler worms in it. And then, had all this food right on hand. That was also when I started making some herbal medicine for just, treating my family and keeping us healthy. Further down the road, when my kids started to, grow up and launch and move out, I started being more interested in creating beauty. Of course, still growing enough food for myself, but without having, multiple kids in the house to feed, I didn't feel as motivated to grow a large amount of food. So I started focusing on beauty, and part of that shift was also when my father died of cancer. I was with him right by his side through his entire battle with cancer, and was his main person to make medical decisions and be with him at all of his appointments and stuff like that. And my dad loved flowers, especially wildflowers, but he just loved flowers in general. And he was somebody who really wanted to be a very masculine man, and yet flowers and birds were some of his greatest joys. And so part of my shift to wanting to really focus on beauty was to just savor life, to recognize the value, the therapeutic value of just creating beauty all around you. It's kind of a way that We can take sort of the discarded or yucky aspects of our lives and sort of compost them and create a medium for rich growth. The beauty that comes from that kind of reminds us to like slow down, enjoy life, be in the present moment, make as much beauty as you can, be a gift to the world, be like a bouquet of flowers on someone's dining table, you know, shine bright, be colorful, allow yourself full expression. About 3 years, I had just amazing flower gardens. And then gradually over time, I ended up selling my screen printing business that I had been operating for 10 years and shifting into a more ecological art practice approach, and also shifting into kind of going back to the education that I had, which was more in social work. So I switched from being primarily an artist and garden coach to being primarily a life coach, and continued to do my art, but it was just different now. So now I do eco printing and natural dye. So then my garden naturally shifted to growing natural dye. That's what I've done the last 3 years at Harmony House, was grow all sorts of plants that you can extract color from, like indigo, madder, Dyer's chamomile, the black magic bachelor buttons, pincushion flowers, amaranth, dye corn, dye sunflowers. And so I've been growing all of those plants as well as collecting the seed and making these wonderful little Dyer's Garden seed kits and selling those, and making a lot of beautiful apparel and accessories that's naturally dyed that I can take to the local artisan market, and then teaching classes. So I started to build a wonderful outdoor studio at Harmony House by converting the carport. So that's where I was at when the opportunity arrived for me to get out of Harmony House and move to the Hummingbird Lane property. So the Harmony House property, as wonderful and amazing as it was, had all the features of a town property. And because I had actually built it up with these really incredible gardens, it became a lot of responsibility to maintain. There's very complicated irrigation systems that I had set up, and there was really intense rhizome grasses there that needed constant maintenance to stay out of all of the perennial gardens I created. And it was just a lot of maintenance. There was really big trees on that property too that required a lot of, limbing up and keeping them safe. And it was a lot of work, and I felt like the work that I was doing was not the kind of work that I wanted to be doing anymore, because it was more like maintaining a, upper end neighborhood landscaping. Started to feel more like that rather than being in a rural area where you can just let some things be naturey and let there be a lot more wild area. So I was starting to get kind of burned out on it, and it was also kind of becoming beyond what I could afford to pay that mortgage there and also do all of the repairs. So I started to have discussions with the homeowner about, what would it look like to sell the property. The other reason that I was really interested in selling at the time was that I wanted to be able to have the property actually be in my name, because all this time it had just been a verbal agreement. And while I trusted this person, completely, it was just kind of getting to a point where wow, it's been 16 years that I've been in this verbal agreement, and I just really need to protect my own financial security and know what the future holds. And also I want to have the benefit of, if theoretically I've gained all this equity, half the equity in the home, then I'd like to be able to use that equity to actually get a loan. At one point my car broke down and it wasn't going to be able to be fixed, and I needed to get a new car, and I wasn't in a position to even be able to get a loan just to get a different car. So the other piece of that story that I didn't mention before is that during the years after the kid's dad died, while I was going to school, I accrued a lot of student loan debt, which was very much a conscious choice at the time. I knew exactly what I was getting into when I made that decision. And I made that decision because I figured that my kids were young, they were grieving the loss of a parent, and I wanted to be able to be present for my children. And by going to school, instead of jumping into a full-time job, I could be present for them. And by receiving student loans, that would pay for me to be able to pursue education and have some of my living expenses covered so that I could actually be there to pick them up from school. I could be there with them every morning for breakfast, go to all their soccer games, tuck them into bed every single night. And so that was a decision that I made that, I went into a lot of debt, but I figured, once the kids are grown and out of the house, I will figure it out later. So this time frame of deciding whether or not to sell Harmony House was when I was figuring it out later, right? And so I was not in a position to be able to get a home loan or a car loan or any kind of loan. I had fantastic credit, but my debt to income ratio is so imbalanced that usually couldn't get a loan on anything. So this is where the story gets really amazing. I started to study isn't the right word. I started to develop a relationship with plants that goes beyond just, botany, and started to really talk to plants, to sleep with plants, to include plants in my everyday rituals, to begin to intuitively understand what medicines various plants have to offer, and really entered into deep relationship with plants. So one day, while I had classes going on in my dye studio, and I was growing dye plants in my greenhouse, and I had some madder plants to be able to, offer for sale. So a woman came to buy some madder plants from me, and I gave her a quick little tour of my backyard, my dye garden, and she was like, wow, this is really amazing. Do you ever think about living rurally? And I was like, yeah, all the time. I'd love to live rurally again. Not too far out, but I would love to have a bigger property. She said, well, my place is for sale in Talent. And I said, oh, really? Interesting. She's like, I think it'd be perfect for you. You should come out and see it. And I thought, well, I hadn't made the decision yet to sell Harmony House. We were just talking about it. So I thought, well, I'll go see it. Why not? So I went out to see it. And sure enough, it's perfect for me. It's this amazing 2 acres. And it's in this really lovely kind of up in the mountains, but it's like this beautiful valley, tiny little valley up in the mountains. It's a lot colder up here and the sun goes down a little earlier, but it's absolutely perfect. The house was much smaller than Harmony House. It's just a 2-bedroom, gorgeous views, like big windows and beautiful views, a barn, other buildings that will work well for art studio, garden shed. It's fenced, so the parts that matter are deer fenced, so it's really just perfect. The other part that was just made me know that this was just the right place for me was that as we were walking around the property and she was showing it to me, I was asking her if she knew, what kind of tree is this and what is this shrub, and every single tree and shrub on the property is a plant that will print. So if you know anything about eco-printing, you know that it's probably only about 30% of all plants will actually have the right pigments in them to leave a print on cloth that's been properly mordanted. So the fact that every single plant on the property is an eco-printer is just, what are the chances, And so that just really felt like a sign. We talked for a little while. I asked her about, what was the price she wanted for the place, and told her that I thought if we put Harmony House on the market, it would probably sell pretty quick. And, this seems like it really could be possible. And I didn't really plan on telling her my personal story about having been widowed and having a terrible debt to income ratio and not thinking that I could get a mortgage, etc. But she was very kind and a good listener and caring, and so I ended up sharing with her what my situation was, and I kind of broke down crying a little bit, and she said, well, my husband and I were actually thinking about offering an owner carry, and I just about fell over. So I was like, are you kidding me? The perfect property, and you could possibly offer an owner carry? the situation really could not get better. This is an absolute dream come true. And it literally showed up at my door. Like, I did not go out looking for it. I didn't ever say any prayers or anything to like ask for this to happen. I just was, growing and selling madder plants and doing the things I would normally do in my life to try to, shine my light and be bright and offer a little something good. And she just showed up at my doorstep and offered me an owner carry ideal property. So I began to have conversations with the owner of Harmony House. We made the decision to get it on the market as quickly as possible. He came with me and looked at the new property and agreed that it seemed like a really good deal. And so we proceeded with that. Within, 3 months' time, Harmony House was sold. I was moving into the Hummingbird House. And now here we are. I am a homeowner, which I never thought could even happen. I can't even explain the elation in my heart about being able to get from, back in 2002, the kids and I were staying in a shelter. And we moved from a shelter to a yurt. And then we moved from a really small yurt into a bigger yurt that was a little better, and then from the yurt into student housing, and the student housing into Harmony House in this wonderful neighborhood, and then managed to, leave Harmony House, and now I'm on this property, this beautiful, beautiful property on Hummingbird Lane, and it's all just such an incredible dream come true. I hope that when you hear the story that you can have some inspiration to think that, sometimes the limiting beliefs that we have, they're just that, they're limiting beliefs. And when we can open ourselves to believe that something bigger and greater is possible, then, sometimes that can happen. And I don't want this to sound like a story of white woman manifestation, because there's a lot involved there with regards to privilege. And the reason that I was able to get to this point and have these opportunities is because of, being a white woman is a really big part of it. There are many privileges that come from that, a lot more opportunity and ease that comes from that, and largely proximity and relationship with someone who has much greater means than me, more credit, more money, just access to resources that they're willing to share. So I am so unbelievably grateful. I'm excited to see what's going to happen with this property over the next 5 years. I've started to work with a couple of folks that have become really dear friends of mine. Karen and Dan, they're both permaculturists, and they're helping me to develop a design for the property. And gradually over time, we'll be removing some fences, putting some different ones in, hopefully building some bioswales, creating shade in some appropriate places. I intend to plant some more fruit trees. Really want to work with water flow on the land. I just have a well here, and it's not necessarily like a very high gallons per minute well, so sequestering water and gathering rainwater is all going to be really important, as well as creating very efficient drip irrigation systems. I'm starting really slow. My intention for this first year is to do as is recommended with permaculture and really mostly just observe. So I'm spending a lot of time just walking along the property at different times of the day, listening with my ears for the birds and the trickling water sounds and, wind in the trees, trying to really notice what direction is the wind coming from this time of the day, and where is there more wind on the property, and how is the water flowing, what are the paths that I see the animals taking, what kind of plants are growing naturally here, the fungal activity, etc. So I'm just doing a lot of observing like that and beginning to think about my various permaculture zones. And so the only things that I'm going to do this first year of being here beyond observing is to move some of the large infrastructure that's kind of in the way of what I wanted to do ultimately, and to work on what I'm going to call zone 0. So zone 0, or even make 0.1 or something, is me, my own home, my own way of sustaining myself financially, and having the resources and infrastructure necessary to just maintain the land, pay the mortgage, do all the basic stuff of just taking care, keeping things at a stasis. So my initial plans are going to be to put in my dye gardens so that I can continue to grow dye plants for my classes, as well as my own art, as well as collecting seed from those dye plants so that I can sell the seed kits on my website. And then I'm going to be expanding my youth internship program. So as this land is being cultivated with permaculture design, I would like to include some youth that I can mentor in a pretty close way, who will get to learn about permaculture design. They'll get to use some power tools. They'll get to grow things from seed to harvest to use. They'll get to participate in the making of art and going to artisan markets and just be involved in the whole process and understand a lot more of the environmental care pieces, how to keep portions of the property wild, how to, manage the water. They'll get to be a part of the entire process of creating a little permaculture farm. That's my vision for what's happening here at Hummingbird House. And there's so much more that I want to be able to share, but I'll just try to share it here and there over time. So I hope that you'll follow along and watch the journey of this property transforming. And I hope that you will get to be a part of it with me. This part about listening to plants, becoming like one of the relatives of the plants and animals in this area. And I hope that we can take this little journey together and that you'll follow along. So thanks for listening to this really long video, and please like and share and follow, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video.